Alrighty. We'll see if some more people trickle in, but we'll go ahead and get started. Let's open up to song number 23. It's an oldie but a goodie. And we'll do the first, second, and third tonight. In other words, first, second, 1, 2, and 4. So 23. There is beyond the azure blue a God concealed from human sight. He tinted skies with heavenly hue and framed the worlds with his great might. There is a God, he is alive, in him we live and we survive. From dust our God, from dust our God, created man, he is our God, he is our God. Great I am, the great I am. There was a long, long time ago a God whose voice the prophets heard. He is the God that we should know, who speaks from his inspired word. There is a God, he is alive, in him we live and we survive. From dust our God, from dust our God, created man, our God, he is our God. Great I am, the great I am. For our God, who sat upon a tree, a life was willing there to give, that he from sin might set man free, and evermore with him could live. There is a God, he is alive, in him we live and we survive. From dust our God, from dust our God, created man, he is our God, he is our God. Great I am, the great I am. One reason I like that song is because it is one of the first ones that I learned when I first became a Christian, so it's very close to my heart. But our next one will be number 38, Awesome God. And we'll sing this through 3 times, but I do try to follow the directions on some of these songs. We do the wisdom, power, and love part twice, and then on the last one, the second part, our God is an awesome God, twice. So on the third time. So number 38. Our God is an awesome God, he reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God, he reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. All right, Matt. get into God's Word. Let's open up to Mark chapter 4. Still working our way through this gospel. As I was looking at this chapter today, it occurred to me that we're going to slow down a little bit and work our way through. So we're going to spend at least a couple more weeks in this chapter because it's very important to get a handle on some of the things that are taught in this chapter. But what this chapter primarily consists of, again, Mark's giving us a record of Jesus' public ministry, but what this chapter really focuses on is the parables of Jesus. This chapter is primarily made up of parables. So I'm going to ask this question again. I'll probably ask it to you again next week. But what are parables? Okay, they're stories. What kind of stories? Okay. So they're stories that help you to understand a point, and what does Jesus use to help us understand that point in the parables? We're on the right track. Okay, his love is definitely behind it, but what kind of language is found in the parables? Okay, symbolic language. Okay. It's basic symbolic language. We might use the word figurative or metaphorical language. But yes, Jesus uses that language in the parables because it's stuff that makes sense to his hearers. But it's in order to make what I'm calling a spiritual point. So it's physical language to make a spiritual point. Now, among the parables that Mark records in this chapter is the one that we've already taken a look at. It's the parable of the sower. We read it in verses 3 through 9. Now, at the end of that parable, Jesus made the statement, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Now, does anyone remember what that statement means? He who has ears to hear, let him hear. To listen. So it's not only taking what is said at face value, just looking at the language, but really listen to the point that's being made through that parable. So Jesus has made that statement where he's encouraging his hearers to hear what is said through the parables. But even though that's the case, when we read verses 10 through 12 of this chapter that we've also looked at, we find that not everyone had ears to hear what the parable of the sower meant. And that's one reason Jesus said that those who are outside of those who have been given the mystery of kingdom of God receive everything in parables. So there are some people who have come to understand what the kingdom of God is really about, but then there's another group of people who have not. So Jesus says they're going to get their lessons through the parables that he's given, through these stories. Now, with that being the case, since not everyone has ears to hear what the parable of the sower meant, it's for this reason that in verses 13 through 20 of this chapter, Jesus goes on to give a more specific explanation of what the parable sower meant. In other words, what Jesus does in verses 13 through 20 is make the spiritual point of the parable, where he begins by asking in verse 13 of this chapter, the text says, "And he said to them, 'Do you not understand this parable? How will you understand all the parables?'" So Jesus is presenting a question, as we see here, but what's the question he's asking, or questions? Okay, yes, do you understand what I'm saying, but what else does he ask? That's it. So it's, if you don't understand this parable that he's just given, how are you going to understand the rest, many of which are found in this chapter alone? So in asking this question or these questions, Jesus is making the point to his hearers that they needed to put on their ears to hear. so that they might understand not only the parable of the sower, but also all the parables that Jesus goes on to give, not only in this chapter, but in others we find in the New Testament, in the Gospels more specifically. So, questions or comments on verse 13? Okay, so Jesus has presented these questions. As a result of that, in verse 14, Jesus goes on to make that point that the parable of the sower was intended to make. He says very simply there in verse 14, the sower sows the word. Now, can anyone remind me what a sower is? Okay, it's a farmer type individual. And from the parable, we know that he's sowing his seed. What does it mean to sow seed from the context? To scatter it. So yes, it's not going and planting, it's just scattering it, letting it fall where it may. That's what the sower in the parable did. But here Jesus is making application. He's now referring to the sower of the parable. What he's really doing on the spiritual end of things is sowing the word. Now, what does it mean to sow the word? Okay, an application means to teach the Bible, but what else does it mean based on? What's that, Dean? You're spreading it around. What were you going to say, Elaine? Okay, you're planting seeds. So it's just speaking the word, letting it fall where it may, just as with the parable of the sower. So it's not necessarily targeting one individual. It's more just spreading the word to whoever's out there listening. And they have their hearts are in different conditions. And that's what we're going to get into in the parable. But it's all hinging upon this point that the sower sows the word. That's the point of the parable. So being someone who sows, that's the point Jesus is going to go on to explain, that the sower sows the word. He's going to explain that in 15 through 20 of this chapter by making 4 points that deal with who people are on whom the seed of the word is sown. Point number 1, Jesus will make in verse 15 is that the seed sown beside the road from the parable are the ones whom the word is immediately taken. The second point Jesus makes in verses 16 and 17 is that the seed sown on the rocky places are the ones in whom the word does not take root. Third point Jesus makes in verses 18 and 19 is that the seed sown among thorns are the ones in whom the word is choked out by the things of this world. Finally, the fourth point Jesus makes in verse 20 is that the seed sown in the good soil are the ones in whom the word bears fruit. So after looking at these things, what we will learn is that we must make a decision as to what is going to happen to the seed of the word when it is sown into our hearts by those who sow it. And we'll talk more about that when we get there. But first, let's listen to how Jesus explains this parable, beginning in verse 15, and we'll read through verse 20. Again, Mark chapter 4, beginning in verse 15, the text says, "These are the ones who are beside the road where the word is sown. And when they hear, immediately Satan comes and takes away the word which has been sown in them. In a similar way, these are the ones on whom seed was sown on the rocky places, who when they hear the word immediately receive it with joy, and they have no firm root in themselves, but are only temporary. Then when affliction or persecution arises because of the word, immediately they fall away. And others are the ones on whom seed was sown among the thorns. These are the ones who have heard the word, but the worries of the world and the deceitfulness of riches and the desires for other things enter in and choke the word, and it becomes unfruitful. And those are the ones on whom seed was sown on the good soil, and they hear the word and accept it and bear fruit 30, 60, and 100-fold. Okay, so again, we're looking at the explanation of the parable. I think I hear my mic going out again. Does this sound funny at all to anyone? No? Okay. All right, maybe it's just me. But, so there are 4 points being made here about the seed being sown. The first is the seed sown beside the road are the ones from whom the word is immediately taken. Now, this point is introduced with Jesus in the first part of this verse. He introduces the fact that there are certain ones who are beside the road where the word is sown. Now, with that in mind, what's the picture here of beside the road where the word is sown? Okay, there it is. So they're just kind of off to the side. So he's using that imagery. There are people like that who hear the word. But part of the point here is they might hear the word spoken, but it's the idea where it goes in one ear, out the other. They're not really interested in hearing the word if and when they hear it. So since it does go in one ear and out the other, what does Jesus say in the second part of the verse? What happens? What does the text say? Okay, Satan immediately comes and takes it away. Now, from the parable, what happened to the seed that happened on the road, or that landed on the road? The birds ate it. It was on the road. The birds immediately came and took it. So Jesus is making the point that so some people are beside the road where the word is sown, when the word is sown. The word goes in one ear, out the other, and Satan has taken away the word. Now also, what Jesus also seems to be doing here is referring to Satan as well as those he rules over as the birds. Now, I didn't think about this till I read something about this recently, but there is a parallel here. And when I read what I read, it was almost like Satan is here. And those he rules over is here. Now, I want to put this in our minds because it was really cool for me to read this, but imagine us sitting here. But not only sitting here, but there's birds flying all around us. That would be a distraction. They're chirping, they're doing what they do. It would be obnoxious. But in a way, they're here, but they're not birds. They're Satan's demons sitting with us here, trying to take the word away from us. Remember, Jesus is making application of the parable of the sower. So Satan and those he rules over are these birds who come and take away the seed of the word. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, if that's what Jesus is doing, the birds who ate up the seed are like Satan, who comes and eats up the word when it enters into our hearts, if our heart is in this condition where we are just beside the road, and allow the word to go in one ear and out the other. So the point we should see from this verse about who the ones are where the seed was sown is that the seed sown beside the road are the ones from whom the word is immediately taken. There are certain people who receive the word, like the seed that fell beside the road in the parable of the sower, or they receive the word, so I keep saying word, and allow Satan to immediately take it from them. In other words, these people hear the word, but the word doesn't do anything because their hearts are in a condition where they have no openness toward the word whatsoever. So the result, Satan takes it away as immediately as it came. Questions or comments on verse 15? Okay. Absolutely. 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 That is a good prayer to pray. And Matt prayed some of that in his prayer just a little bit ago, to have open minds and hearts. And I appreciate that. So just with that in mind, just to put this in our minds a little bit more, is I'm going to tell you who the most faithful churchgoer is out of everybody. Satan. He's at church every Sunday, but not for the same reasons we are, for the reason of taking the word away from us when it enters our hearts. So that's why what Andrea said is true. That's why Matt's prayer was very appropriate for the occasion. So that's your little sermonette on verse 15. Any more questions or comments? All right. Verses 16 and 17, the second point. The seed sown on the rocky places are the ones in whom the word does not take root. So here we're moving a little bit forward, but Jesus introduces this point in verse 16. He brings forth the image we've already looked at, the seed sown on the rocky places. Now, what are the rocky places versus beside the road? Go back in the parable if you have to. Exactly. Exactly. So that's from the parable. There's some soil there, but there's a whole bunch of rocks in the soil. So Jesus makes application of that to this idea of sowing the word. These people, they hear the word. Now, according to verse 16, how do they receive it? With gladness. You have the word gladness there? Okay. The American Standard has joy, but it's synonymous. Now, what does it mean to receive the word with gladness or joy? You're happy to hear it. People beside the road, they don't care. These people, yeah, I want to hear the word. I want to go to church. I want to sit down and study the Bible with you. Great. These people, they have some interest in the word. Some. So these people are slightly different. They don't entirely ignore the word. It doesn't go in one ear and out the other. But they're happy to hear it spoken. They have some openness toward the word. But even though this is the case, Jesus goes on into verse 17. What does he say about them? What don't they have? No root in themselves. Now why are roots important in a plant? That's how they get their nutrition and remain stable. Okay. So yes, the root system is important. It keeps them stable. It's where they get their nutrition. So they have to have the roots. But not only do they have to have roots, those roots have to be firm. Jesus says these people, they have no firm root in themselves, but are only temporary. What does it mean when something is temporary? Shannon says it doesn't last very long. Only goes so far. So, in these people's lives, the word only goes so far until what happens? Trouble. The American Standard uses the words affliction or persecution. Now, why does this trouble come according to this verse? Because of the word. So it's not just trouble in general, it's trouble that comes as a direct result of these people's devotion to the word. So when that trouble comes, what happens in these people? They stumble or fall away is what the New American Standard has. So there's some language we sometimes use in our circles, fall away or stumble. What does it mean? In some cases, you never come again. Fall away. But why? According to this verse, why do these people fall away as far as the word is concerned? Okay, they were persecuted for it. And what else does the text say about the word? What? They endured it only for a time, but what has the word not done in that? That's it. It hasn't taken root. So it's there, no question, but it hasn't really gotten a solid hold on these people. And because that's true, as soon as trouble comes because of their relationship with the word, they say, no thanks. They fall away. So yes, that word fall away, stumble is another good translation for it because it means to trip or to fall. And it's here to say that people stumble in their relationship with the word when trouble comes because of it. Mhm. Yeah, that's another way to look at it. The testing comes and they fail the test. So the point we should see from verses 16 and 17 about who the ones are where the seed is sown is that the seed sown on the rocky places are the ones in whom the word does not take root. Jesus has shown that people in whom the word does not take root, they're like that rocky ground, where the seed might fall, might begin to grow, but it doesn't take root because there's those rocks that don't allow it to grow as it should. As far applying that to the word, these people, the word does not penetrate deep enough into their hearts for the word to grow and cause the person to make any real change in their lives. That's a good way to point it out. Their heart is still kind of hard. Maybe not completely hard, but kind of. Yeah, that's a good application of the rock side of this. So, with this being the case, what happens to these people is that they slip back into their old ways with the possibility that they might never come back again. So that brings us into point number 3, the thorns. The seed sown among the thorns are the ones in whom the word is choked out by the things of this world. So here we're moving a little bit more further into the process. Jesus begins in verse 18, introducing the next group of people. The ones on whom the seed was sown among the thorns, these are people that have also heard the word. So who are these people? In verse 18. What does Jesus say? What have these people done? Okay, we'll get there. Verse 18. Who are these people? What have they done in verse 18? They've heard the word. It's that simple. Very similar to verses 16 and 17. These people, they've heard the word, probably happy to have heard the word. These might also be people who have survived those troubles, like the rocky places have not. So they're a little bit further, they're better in some ways. But we come to verse 19. In verse 19, what happens? What else? There's a list here. Okay, so 3 things. Cares of the world, deceitfulness of riches. And what do those things do, Dean? The desires of other things. And what happens, Dean? You just said it. It chokes the word and it becomes unfruitful. Those things do go together. Now, what does it mean to choke something? Okay, to cut off its life, cut off its air is one way to look at that. But yes, Jesus uses these 3 things. Now, what are the cares of this world? What are some examples of those? Okay, we'll look at those in a minute, but what are cares of this world? The other 2 are probably examples of those. But yeah, so the things we're usually concerned with. That's what worries of this world is. And Sandy, if you don't mind me using this, a hole in your carpet is a concern of this world. A hole in your floor. So that's thing number 1. Thing number 2 is the deceitfulness of riches. What is that about? The money. Now, why is that? Why can money be deceitful? Think everything you want with it. Elaine said you think it can solve everything. The love of. Yeah, Jesus is not saying at all there's anything wrong with having wealth. But what he is pointing out here is that wealth can be deceitful. And that's thing number 2 that can choke the word out of you. Finally, the desires for other things. What are desires? Wants. Strong wishes, wants, things you want. So those three things, Jesus says, can choke the word out of you. And when the word is choked out of you, what happens, according to this verse? What does it mean when something is unfruitful? Doesn't produce anything. Remember the parable. The seed sown among the thorns, it began to grow, probably developing a root system, but it was choked out because there are other things growing with it that took over. Now, we can have the word in our hearts, but if we allow things like this to grow up with the word in our hearts, those other things can choke the word out of our hearts because those other things become more important. So, the word unfruitful is used here to refer to the fact that the things of this world do not allow the seed of the word to produce anything in a person's life because the things of this world have choked the word out of their hearts. Putting these things together, the point we should see from verses 18 and 19 about who the ones are on whom the seed is sown is that the seed sown among the thorns are the ones in whom the word is choked out by the things of this world. For some people, the things of this world choke the word out of their hearts. The worries of this world, jobs, things we're concerned with, the deceitfulness of riches, money, the desires for other things, that and more can choke the word out of our hearts. The result, the word becomes unfruitful because it does not produce anything. Because that's the end goal. It's something to be produced. Not just having the word in our hearts. That's not the end goal. The end goal is the word producing something in our lives. We can sit here every Sunday, every Wednesday, and listen to the word. But if the word is not making a difference when we leave this building out those doors, then the goal has not been accomplished. And that's what brings us into verse 20, the fourth point. The seed sown on the good soil are the ones in whom the word bears fruit. Now, as with the previous points, in the first part of this verse, Jesus is introducing the fourth and final group of people discussed in this section, who are people on whom the seed was sown on the good soil. Now, let's just be reminded, what's the seed? The word. The word is sown, and now it's parallel to the good soil. Now, what was the good soil versus these other kinds that we just looked at? It's where the seed can grow well, and what else happens when it's put in good soil? It's nurtured. What else? It produces a lot, and we're going to look at that here in just a minute. So yes, the good soil is the soil that has everything the seed needs. Not just some of what it needs, but everything. So as far as people are concerned, who are people with the good soil? In the second part of this verse, what do they do? Hear the word and accept it. Now, what does it mean to accept something? Okay, to believe it, to receive it, take it in, and do it. So this isn't just hearing the word. It's not just sitting here and listening to it. It's taking it into your heart in the truest sense of the phrase. So these people allow the word to penetrate into their heart a lot deeper than the previous three groups. Since this is true, this final group of people are people who do not allow the word to go in one ear and out the other, where Satan takes it. They're people who allow the word to survive in their hearts when the trouble comes. They're people who do not allow the things of this world to choke it out of them. So as with the parable, here also in the application of the parable, we're seeing a progression. Beside the road, it's gone immediately. In the rocky soil, it doesn't take root. Among the thorns, it's choked out, but here, it grows the way it's supposed to. With the result, what's the result of this? In that last part of the verse, what happens to the word in these people? It bears fruit. And what does it mean to bear fruit? Okay, that might be an application of bearing fruit, but what happened to the seed on the good soil in the parable? What did it do? It produced. That's what it means to bear fruit, to produce something. But Jesus doesn't stop there. What else does he say after the word bears fruit? Now, what does that mean? Lots. It keeps growing. That's the point Jesus is making, is that in these people that have hearts that are good soil, the word doesn't only grow, it grows and grows and grows. It keeps growing. It doesn't just grow to a point, but it keeps growing and growing. Now, have you grown since you guys became Christians? Just let me, I'm only asking this because it's pertinent to this. How long have people in here been Christians? How long have, just for anyone who wants to volunteer this information, how long have you been a Christian? 40 plus years. Let's use that. Now, Elaine, have you grown in 40 plus years in your Christianity? Yes. That alone is evidence that the word keeps growing, even over a period of 40 plus years. The word needs to keep growing. But that's only going to happen if your heart is in this condition of being the good soil. If it's not, at some point the word is going to get choked out. If it's not, at some point the word is going to get taken away. And we go back to the previous three groups. But here, Jesus is saying that the people who have hearts like the good soil are people who are continually growing in their relationship with the word and the God who gave it. So the word is continually producing changes. So the point we should see from verse 20 about who the ones are in whom the seed was sown is that the seed sown on the good soil are the ones in whom the word bears fruit. The ones who have hearts like the good soil, the word is producing something. It's that transformation that Andrea alluded to earlier. The word not only produces something, but it continues to produce something, because these are people who are continually allowing the word to penetrate into their hearts so that the word might allow them to make changes in their lives that are pleasing to God. They don't allow anything or anyone to take the word from their hearts. Instead, they keep the word in their hearts and obey it continually. Questions or comments on verse 20? All right. So when we consider everything that Jesus has said in verses 13 through 20 of this chapter, the point we should be left with is the one stated in verse 14. The sower sows the word. But where does it go? It lands on different places. It lands on the road, where it's immediately taken. It lands on the rocky places where it doesn't take root. It lands among thorns where it's choked out. Finally, it lands on good soil and it bears fruit. So which one are you? That's the decision we have to make and examine ourselves. Where's our heart? Is our heart the road? Is our heart the rocky ground? Is our heart the thorns? Or is it the good soil? We have to make the choice of which one we will be. So one of at least four things, given that that's the case, one of at least four things is going to happen to the word when it enters our hearts. It should transform us. But from the language Jesus uses, the word can be immediately taken away from us. It can be not take root. It could choke. Sorry, I'm stumbling. It could be choked out. But on a positive note, Jesus also says it can bear fruit. Or as Sandy put it, transform us. Because the word is continually producing changes in our lives and transforming us daily into the image of Jesus to the point that nothing will be able to take it away from us. Even if we end up like Jesus and are crucified because of our relationship with the word. But again, we have to decide what is going to happen to the word when it enters our hearts. Now, those are just some applications from these things. Any other questions or comments? All right. Dean, will you close us tonight?